I mentioned in the talk-up that the clocks went back in Britain today. It's next week before they do in the United States. But the clocks went back in Britain to the 19th century, when in the middle of a pandemic, an economic collapse, mass unemployment, the immiseration of millions of working class people, the government set its face, slammed the dinner hall door in the face of Britain's poorest children. Just over 1 million of them. A mere bagatelle, loose change down the back of the sofa. Compared, for example, to Eat Out to Help Out, that Rishi Sunak paid Britain's restaurateurs millions and millions of pounds of your money to boost their businesses. Good, I enjoyed it. It was a good thing. But in the wake of that, to slam the dinner hall door on 1 million poor children who in the summer holidays did get a free school meal, because for many of them, that's the only square meal that they'll get in a day, because their parents are too poor to provide proper sustenance for them. Now, we can argue about whether anyone should be on free school meals, whether our people should be so impoverished that their children can't afford the price of a school meal. We could argue that. I myself was on free school meals throughout my life in primary and secondary school. In fact, I'll let you in on a secret. My first ever political battle was at the age of 13, when I discovered that unlike in the primary school, we free school meals kids had a different colour of dinner ticket to those that had paid for their lunch. Theirs was grey and ours was pink, fluorescent pink. So as you stood there in the queue for your dinner, before you handed over your ticket, everybody knew that you were poor and that the local authority was having to pay for your lunch. This was a kind of apartheid, if you think about it. So on the second day of this, I began organising a strike and a picket of the dinner hall. I argued with every person going into the dinner hall, whatever colour of ticket that they had, that this was simply unacceptable. It was a stigmatisation of poor kids. And by the Thursday, we'd won. And the apartheid ticket system was abolished. That was my first victory. I've had many great victories since and one or two significant defeats, but it was a great victory. So I don't believe, as it happens, that any child should be paying for their school lunch. Being properly fed and being focused on your school work are one and the same thing. They cannot be separated one from the other. If a child goes to school having had a proper breakfast, if they've had a proper lunch, then they'll be more focused, more successful. And if they're more successful, we're more successful. One of the most repugnant things that I have seen over the last few days in the wake of the pride of England, Sir Marcus Rashford as he will be, his campaign to get free school dinners for the poorest kids during the Christmas holidays in the middle of a pandemic and an economic depression has brought forth from the sewers all the old arguments we used to have before we even created a national health service or any kind of welfare state at all. I provided my own dinners for my own children. Why should I, as a taxpayer, pay for someone else's kids? I thought that those arguments had been won. Not in 1945. I thought those arguments had been won in the wake of Charles Dickens, about whom much more later, in his writings about the Victorian squalor that England was, that Scotland was, that Britain was in the 19th century. I thought we'd won the argument that the poorest amongst us are our responsibility as a society. Otherwise, we don't have a society. We have a tale of two cities. We have a tale of two countries. The haves and the have-nots. The haves and the have-yachts. I thought we'd won that argument about us and always, as opposed to me and now. Me and now. What kind of country would we be if there were poor ragamuffins lining the streets hungry? Who'd want to live in such a country, in the sixth richest economy on the earth? Who'd want to live in a country where poor people were hungry? Only an idiot, actually, because one day all the hungry will climb over your wall and eat your dinner. Don't you see? If you don't look after the workers, those that cannot find work, then you will pay one day the ultimate price for that. Surely we should all go forward together. Wasn't that what Mr. Churchill said when exhorting us to pull together as one people to face the Blitz, to face the challenge of Hitler at the Channel ports? Wasn't that the argument that prevailed in Britain from 1945 until Margaret Thatcher in 1979? That we are one people, that we are one nation, that we are one country, and the existence of mass poverty amongst millions of our people is a stigma not on them but on us, a stigma on our system, on our society, a stigma that needs to be expunged. I thought we'd won that argument, but on Twitter I've been aghast at some of the people who've been slating this 22-year-old young black footballer from Wythenshawe, one of the poorest estates in the entire country. Marcus Rashford, Dr. Marcus Rashford, MBE, is MBE for a reason. He's a national treasure for a reason, because of his love of the people. And the people are loving him back. Which leads me to the first point I'm going to ask Professor Sir John Curtis. And it was touched on by Patrick Christys on this show on Wednesday on the midweek modes. Who's advising Boris Johnson? Who told him that it was a good idea to have a war with Marcus Rashford over free school meals costing tuppence in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the Christmas holidays? Who advised Boris Johnson that Scrooge was a good look over Christmas for a few coins compared to the trillion that we have already shelled out, for the most part, $1 trillion? Who advised the Tories that turning the clock back to the 19th century was a good look, particularly in the north? The Red Wall and the great Northlands that lie to the north of it were won by the Tories last December, not 12 months ago. And Tories popped up as MPs in poor places all over the north of England, overwhelmingly because of Brexit. Who advised the Tories that the best way to hang on to those seats was to be a hammer of the north, to tell the mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, that he could eat cake? Who advised the Tories that this was the hill to die on, the hill marked free school dinners for a fortnight during the Christmas holidays? I could advise Boris Johnson better, and I don't even like him. I'm against him. But I could have given him better advice than that. What's on Hunter Biden's laptop? Well, if the New York Post is to be believed, some of the most horrendous material that you can possibly imagine. And I won't dwell on the dirtiest of the things on Hunter Biden's laptop. I'll concentrate instead on the evidence that appears to be there in that laptop that proves the Bidens were a crime family, so venal that when they walked into a room, they got a standing ovation from the Clintons. That's how venal. They knock the Clintons into a cocked hat. They're up to their neck, not just in corruption. Everyone's focusing on the corruption of the Ukrainian deal. Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have turned the Ukraine into a cesspit of corruption, of mass poverty, and the mass exportation of their workers to go and work as cheap labor in the European countries that will never accept the Ukraine into the European Union. The crime that Biden and Obama and Clinton committed against Ukraine was far bigger than the personal crime of making millions out of the misery of post-coup Ukraine. We'll be talking to Katie Halper about that and about whether Donald Trump is going to be dancing YMCA style on November 3rd, which is only, I think, 9 days away. Can Trump prove to be the new Lazarus? Can he resurrect himself from the apparent political grave that his madness and the coronavirus seem to have laid him cold in? We'll be talking to the doyen of political scientists in Britain, the dean of the Faculty of Psephology, Professor Sir John Curtis, about who advised the Tories to pick a fight with Marcus Rashford and how come Keir Starmer is such a stumer that he's still behind Boris Johnson in the polls. Literally, a scarecrow in the fields would be able to be 20 points ahead, to coin a phrase, of Boris Johnson, but not Sir Keir Starmer. En passant, I've just moved to the Scottish borders and there was an earthquake there today. Yes, an earthquake near Dumfries. It was only 2.0 on the Richter scale, but it was an earthquake. My return to Scottish politics might turn out to be an earthquake too. I hope a lot bigger than 2.0 on the Richter scale. It's going to be the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.